Stay calm, just like we practiced.
I'm the Smoking Cheddar, but you probably already knew that, and this is another Officer Spotlight, and we are doing these back to back. That's why I haven't changed my t-shirt since the last one, because I just stopped hitting record and then started again. So, we've got a versatile field defensive officer, Captain Unbeaten. As always, we'll go from tactical skill through to the end awakened skill. We'll grade them between 1 and 5. We'll give an overall score, and we'll talk a little bit about how we can get these officers working. So guys, let's have a look at the first skill. And his tactical skill, Bravado, grants the officer's warship a shield coefficient of up to 1800 with a damage resist of 15% for 8 seconds. Now this is much like the event officer skill, but almost the exact opposite side of the coin. We get an 1800 shield coefficient and we get a damage resistance of 15%. This is a flat 4. I like it. I think it's very, very good. And if you watched the previous video, you're going to understand where I'm going with this pretty quickly and how this can be used. Move on to the second skill is Survival Tactics. Increase the HP of the officer's troop by up to 40%. I do kind of feel like this should have had a damage resist attached to it and maybe dropped 10%. I think 40% is pretty good, much like the 40% in the firepower we saw in the previous video. I think it's a 4. I don't think there's anything particularly wrong with the HP buff. It's going to go on a heavy hard unit. 40% is a lot of HP to be given to it. The third skill, Lucky One, increases the damage resistance. I didn't actually read these skills in advance. The damage resistance is increased by up to 20%. I like this one quite a bit. This is damage resistance of 20%. You got to remember, guys, that when you have Everbloom awakened, when you have Vox awakened, her tactical skill gives you 35%. This is basically half a tactical skill, so it's a persistent passive. Damage resistance of 20% though, I think that's a 4, because damage resistance is extremely useful. Extremely useful. I think that's a 4. We're moving on to the fourth skill, and as always, a special skill can make or break an officer. This increases the missile defense of this officer's warship by up to 25%. Now, if you have been playing the campaign and you have been playing with destroyers like myself, you've probably noticed that every now and again a very small intercepting missile comes out and shoots down the incoming missiles. This skill will prevent your ship from sinking. It's a point defense skill. I think 25%, we've got nothing to compare it to, but it increases the current defense by a quarter. If you're stacking this with other skills, that's extremely good. As a skill by itself, I think this skill is probably... I'm going to say this is a 4, because this is going to be how you prevent your ship from effectively sinking. I would probably argue that if you have a high enough missile defense buff, it's probably better than having a shield altogether. So I'm going to say this is a 4. I kind of like this skill. I think it's very useful. I've seen it in action, and I have kind of tweaked my setup a little bit just to get a little bit more out of it using a supporting anti-aircraft destroyer. I'll cover that in a deep dive video. That will come at a later date. This brings us neatly on to our last skill, which is the Awakened skill, Living Legend. Whenever this officer's warships are attacked, they have a 20% chance to recover HP, healing coefficient of 500, and can trigger once every 8 seconds. Now, if obviously the more intense the combat is, the higher the frequency this is going to pop once the cooldown has gone off. So 20% sounds like a 1 in 5 shot is pretty long, and if you're fighting one-on-one, that is a pretty you're waiting a while for it. But if you're fighting in the field or out in open ocean, as it were, 20% is actually really high, because you could be fighting 3 or 4 vessels that are firing once every 1 or 2 seconds, and you're going to get a 500 heal coefficient the moment he is awakened. I think this is a 4. This, if it came with a skill damage reduction as well, I would say this is a 5, but a 500 healing coefficient isn't particularly high. However, we are talking in terms of quite high HP, so that is going to be a pretty decent chunk of health regardless. I think this is a 4. I think this is a good skill. I think this guy is a very, very good officer just to have laying about the place. That scores him a 4 out of 5. I think he is good. I think he's very good. The caveat: this guy really only works on the armoured destroyer. It says versatile, but realistically he only works on the armoured destroyer, because the armoured destroyer is basically the soak of the sea. It's the super heavy, it's the infantry, it's doing the grunt work, you're putting it out in front of your fleet in order for it to get hit, because it has the highest amount of HP, it's got the highest amount of sloped armour. You want it to take damage while your other destroyers, your other vessels, your aircraft carrier are out of combat, and they are the ones dealing damage towards the enemy. Now, not that being said, the armored destroyers do pack a massive punch with their main guns. They are pretty deadly, and they do have a pretty decent rate of fire. But I still think this guy is armored destroyer pretty much almost exclusively. You probably could get away with sticking him on a anti-submarine frigate to give you that edge in a frigate on sub fight. But you will obviously, those vessels are fairly weak. You don't really want them getting hit. I've used them in the campaign quite a bit, and generally those anti-submarine frigates, if you keep them at the back or to the flank and they're not getting hit, they're dealing a lot of normal attack damage. So this is more of a case of, hey, I've got an aircraft carrier and a sub and a frigate. You probably want to stick this dude on the frigate then. But if you have a destroyer, any destroyer, I run a destroyer squadron at the moment, so I've got all 3 destroyers, 1 from each faction. But if you have just 1 destroyer and it's of any faction, you should probably consider him for the destroyer. The destroyers, as I said, the MBTs of the sea, they're pretty good, they're pretty flexible, and they've got sloped armor and HP. The 2 things you're going to need to put a shield on, realistically. Anyway, that's this guy over and done with. There's not really a great deal to say about him other than I didn't know that the Royal Navy got that fat. I've been the Smoking Cheddar. That was a very, very niche joke, and you've been very patient. That wasn't even a joke. I've been the Smoking Cheddar, you've been very patient, and this has been a fat Royal Navy officer.